Hi. Today I'm going to talk about something I consider fundamental, and it's always ask questions. Always ask questions about why you're doing what you're doing. What's the purpose? What's the reason? And the question I'm gonna ask today, I'm gonna demonstrate a couple things, and I'm gonna ask a couple questions. The big question is why score? Why do we bother putting music to anything that isn't just music out of context? And it addresses a couple things here because I think there is a very distinct differentiation between music and music for picture. What are the fundamental mechanics that make a score a score? Why does a score sound distinctly like a score and real music outside of just the sake of composition exists as it does? What's the difference between the two? And I think addressing the mechanics and the functionality of scoring really answers that question in a far less literal way. So if I were to use an analogy to explain what I think score is, and if you judge score out of context, so if you don't like if you take a score as a piece of music and you pull it out of what it was doing mechanically to picture, you've done something a disservice. You've taken away about 90% of what that piece of art was doing. So how I describe it is if you took a piece of wallpaper and tried to put it in a picture frame. Music in context, is it wallpaper? Kinda. Does it actually serve the function that, wallpaper does to a room? Yeah, it gives you a feeling. It elicits a response without drawing an intense amount of attention to itself unless its purpose is to announce that. And I think, say, if you're a composer and you're making like art and it's being used as wallpaper, I think you're in the wrong industry. You should be making music that stands up on its own, that serves its own functional purpose. Now, I think that is a controversial opinion for people who are fans of score music. I think a lot of them would happily shit on that opinion, and cool. I think maybe what I'm saying is offensive in that sense that maybe it's weird to listen to scores out of context, but I mean it's not. I'm just being a dink, but it's like, yeah, it's just different because there's so much going on for so many reasons for a score. So I'm going to show you this cue, and I'm going to show you something interesting that most people will never get to experience because they don't make TV. So in this case, in this cue, this was a very simple cue. It's a very short cue, and it's a very simple scene. I'm going to play through without music. I'm going to drink some coffee. Oh, notice that. We're going to talk about that
I'm scrubbing in
the why music
You're welcome
thing.
to, but it's not necessary.
He's the leader of my team. I wasn't asking for permission.
We're going to talk about that too. And for the sake of the scene, I'm going to stop there. So, that's a good scene. You know what it does is it really works without music. There are some key moments though that I really feel would benefit from music. Thus, when spotting it, I would say, hey, we need to do some music here. So, what I think, like why, again, to get to the fundamental question, which I don't think is pedantic in any way to be asking, is why score? Why do we need a score? Why do this? So in this case, there's a couple scenes here. we're juggling back and forth between Philip and this heavy operating scene. The operating scene has its own feel. It's different, and the mechanics of what's happening in the score. I'm gonna play it through and just rant a little bit about some of the stuff as I do. Right there. What happened?
I'm scrubbing in.
You're welcome to, but it's not necessary.
He's the leader of my team. I wasn't asking for permission.
And boom. All right. So, what that achieved fundamentally as a score was it tied the scenes together. It didn't, as you can see, the musical elements are staying consistent up to a key point. There's something that's weaving each thing together, and in tying the scenes together, it creates momentum and energy. And what momentum and energy create is a draw into the picture. So fundamentally, you can watch this scene without music and it still has a draw. You're still watching it, you're still engaged. But if you create the right type of score with the right type of, fairly minimal things like this simple, like here's to address the first thing I want to say is why I like analog synths. I just love the tactile hand-on thing and the fullness of the sound. So I'm using all the Dave Smith OB6 for this whole thing. All the synth parts are this Oberheim synth, which it's got so much creative sound design potential. It has not really good presets, and it doesn't reveal itself as such a like just diverse sound design tool until you really dig into it. So I mean, I love shit like that. So there's a couple reasons why stuff like that, like I'm big into filtering, so I liked using in that case I was using the electron analog heat, and there's a couple of reasons why the filtering works. Come on, picture. Why the filtering works. So it's out, and then watch this. Wash, turn on the head, second wash on the focus. So there's little tiny things you can do that emulate the gestures of, in this case, the director of photography and the work he was doing. So by doing these subtle things like that, you can switch back and forth, and the energy created here, like let's say I mute this part, it's like, okay, it plays over, nothing's drawn, but let's watch it again. That really propels the picture forward, this very simple thing. Now these two parts, you can hear how sloppy it is. There's a little theme going on here that becomes the tension kind of like thing. What the percussion's doing is really cool too. And then we do this whole scene shift. So the shift changes the pace, and the change of pace again keeps things interesting and draws you in. Like I said, the scene is good on its own. It all works. It's all fundamental, but there's another, 10, 15, 20% that you can get out of the engagement. And at the end of the day, the purpose of the show is engagement and immersion. Like you want to probably forget your life for a little while. You want to be immersed in these characters. It's the real unifying element of what brought us together culturally was storytelling. People telling stories, creating these things. We have these enormous prefrontal cortex components for storing humans and people and stories and things in our brains, and this is just a really beautiful engagement of all those things. I truly believe that television is the storytelling medium, because the ultimate storytelling medium, because it spans years. You change with these characters. You're engaged. You're you're part of them as they grow up and you grow up, and the writers change and everyone involved changes. I mean, this is an old cue for me. This cue's 3 years old now. I was a different person when I wrote it with a different approach, and it's very interesting for me to go back and analyze something I would have done 3 years ago. So, I mean, there isn't much else to talk about. You've seen what this cue is doing fundamentally. You've seen the mechanics of it, and I think I've answered the question as to why we would score, but there are dozens of different answers. And I think, again, at the end of the day, score versus music, what's the fundamental difference is if I'm provoking something to a plot, it's outlining this narrative structure that's been written and created by the editors and the writers and the producers and every performance. My work is inspired 100% by their work. Everything that they do affects how I think about what I'm going to do musically. So it's the musical expression and embodiment of everything and every piece of work that everyone's done before me. And it's a really nice thing to be a part of. And I think the music itself, the results of it outside of context, you know what? It's not going to stand up next to a Mahler symphony, but your emotional engagement to it might be higher than listening to a Mahler symphony. So just on its own, I mean, it's like you wouldn't know what that filter suite meant. One other thing I will address, as a really effective technique for mixing and getting energy like this with this filtering stuff, is actually, it seems counterintuitive, but once you've gone through and scored everything to make sure you're not stepping on dialogue, it's to actually mute the sound, because that engages a different part of your sensory experience. Without any dialogue, what you're noticing is you're picking up more on the gestures, the overall physical movement of the score, and how the music can improve and engage and reflect that. Like, there's dialogue there, so you don't want to get too busy, but that percussion part is Marcy. That's representative of the intensity of her dialogue, and what it does is it mimics the sort of staccato motion and gesture.
You're welcome to, but it's not necessary.
He's the leader of my team. I wasn't asking for permission.
So an easy way to get a scene working is to actually go through it first percussively, map it out, and make sure that you're not stepping on any parts. You can see the whole dynamic, and then you can go through and figure out, okay, what do we do musically here? There's a couple chords, I think. So what that is referencing is the next scene. It's just a 2-chord motif that we used for her doing the operating. So yeah, I mean, overall, I think that there's a couple of good lessons and questions, fundamental questions, maybe half-assed answered. It's something that you can explore very in depth, but it goes in line with my belief that provocation is necessary in picture. And yeah, there's a lot of different types of scores out here. The one I'm talking about very specifically is fundamental craft style scoring. It integrates elements of a vibe and a sound. Like, that's why I'm using a lot of analog synths and why I like the character of them and the sonority. But it's fundamental craft TV scoring, and that's its own thing. And I have my own sort of fairly intransigent opinions about it, because I've been doing it a long time, and I really believe that a good score makes a show more watchable and more engaging. And I'm in the luxurious position of watching shows without music to know how they can be improved. And that's my job, is to elevate the picture, always to be elevating the picture. I want my shows to get renewed. I want you to be engaged. I want you to be immersed, and I want to be part of your experience in watching something that you enjoy and something that you love, that we all love and take part of. And it's great. It's not, I'm not I'm not like a music composer. I'm not a person that's going to sit and write a pop album. I don't think I can anymore. I think I was would I want to? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'll write some kind of pop album. But anyway, I hope I hope you can appreciate scoring a little bit more. That's just my intent, is that you can appreciate scoring and you can learn a technical approach to it and just gain more enjoyment and awareness out of what you're doing.